This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, we're going to break the rules of the Monday show this week. You all know how much I like keeping you on your toes. The unpredictability factor of the FSWR report. So, normally the Monday podcast is the WWE WWF show. Got the Retro Raw and the SmackDown reports, and more often than not, that usually eats up the bulk of the screen time. As you can tell by today's title, though, we are going to be discussing the 1987 Crockett Cup. To some degree. There's a caveat that I'm going to throw in there. But I said I wanted to cover a little bit of the tournament. Whatever footage I was able to obtain of it. This was still before pay-per-view was a thing. So, I mean, you know how it is trying to find old footage out there. It can be very tricky sometimes. Thankfully, with the internet, a lot of it's more easily accessible now. But, well, first we're going to run down the regular reports on Raw and SmackDown, get those out of the way as quickly as humanly possible, because those shows were not as intriguing as the Crockett Cup, to put it mildly. And whereas normally I would take the time to try and delay the discussion, this week I think I'm going to dive headfirst into everything, starting with the Retro Raw report so we can get it out of the way and move on. We'll touch on the SmackDown side of things too. There's quite a bit of stuff to talk about with that one too. Not a lot of it was good, but it was more noteworthy than Retro Raw was, which is kind of turning into a theme of, can I come up with more than 5 minutes of material to talk about for a 45-minute program? The answer is quickly becoming no. We've gone from, let me share some stories about my childhood growing up watching Raw from the mid-90s, to, let me see if I can relive these horrible experiences without wanting to hit the fast forward button for the majority of it. The urge is there. The temptation is there. But as we say constantly, Raw rolls on. And I must resist the urge to want to skip over most of it. I mean, it's only 45 minutes. How bad can it possibly get, right? Famous last words. And we're barely scratching the surface of how bad things are about to get. Just you wait. We're only in 1994. 1995. Oh boy, we're going to have a ball with that one. But now let's get going with this report. This was the April 11th, 1994 episode. And we really didn't get off to a good start with this one. Man, oh man. Talk about bad timing. You know, we're sitting here 1 week ago doing the Retro Raw report from 94. They left us with that cliffhanger that the fans were going to get to vote to see which set of challengers the Quebecers would have to defend their tag titles against the following week. And it was through one of those old WWF hotline call-in numbers. And the three teams they had to choose from were Men on a Mission, the Smoking Guns, and the Bushwhackers. And I think you know where I'm going with this discussion. Sure enough, One of the news bulletins that hits the wrestling media over the last week was the announcement of the recent death of Bushwhacker Butch. And when I read that first article, I thought, oh, that's kind of sad. You know, you never like hearing news about wrestlers passing away. And then I saw the actual start to this show, and there's Butch and Luke on camera trying to hard sell people to call in and vote for them to get the title shot later on. And I saw them there, and I'm like, ah, man, that's depressing. And, you know, we've talked about it before. It's easy enough for me to sit here and talk about the fact that I was not a big Bushwhackers fan in the WWF. They were just a little too cartoonish and over the top for me. I always enjoyed them a lot better when they were the sheep herders. Like some of the old tapes you find when they wrestled in Portland. Like those are always some of the go-tos that I enjoy watching. I mean, go watch the stuff with them and Roddy Piper from like the late 70s, early 80s if you want to see the sheep herders in their prime. In the WWF version of them, I could have done without. But, you know, I really didn't grow up getting a chance to see them wrestle anywhere outside the WWF, unfortunately. So that was really my only frame of reference until I went back years later and saw some of the earlier footage of them. You know, not marching around like nut jobs and licking the fans' faces every week. But all three teams cut pre-taped interviews to try to get people to vote for them to get the title shot. But, you know, the first shot of Raw this week, opening with the Bushwhackers on camera. Then it just made me realize that Butch passed away. And, what was that, like a little over a week ago by now? You know, I didn't mention it on any of the recent shows. But, you know, it's sort of a reminder for all of us older fans out there to know that a lot of our childhood favorites are starting to enter the older stages of their lives. You know, it won't be long before most of them are gone entirely. I still remember it hitting me pretty hard when the Macho Man died 12 or so years ago. To think it's been that long. It's insane. Not to immediately get off on a dour note for the program, but you know how it goes sometimes. They really didn't turn things around with the opening match this week. I'm like, well, the Butch news is rather sad, but maybe they'll start off with a hot match and get things back on good footing. And then out comes Diesel. And I'm like, well, there goes any potential good news. And to make things even worse, guess who his opponent was? Virgil. And while some of you might ask yourselves, well, isn't there an added layer of comedy to seeing Diesel evidently have a bad match with Virgil? Well, the answer in this case was no. It wasn't even bad. It was just boring. The funny part in this match was hearing the Macho Man say, I don't know what it is, but there's something different about Diesel. Something that makes him stand out in the WWF, and it's not just the size. And there's about a 10-second awkward pause. I'm waiting for the Macho Man to have a follow-up statement. And I think I determined by that point there was not a single thing that Vince, Macho Man, or myself could figure out what made Diesel stand out in the WWF, discount the size. Because the reality is, that's pretty much everything Kevin Nash had going for him in the WWF, was the size. That's why Vince pushed him. I mean, there's a reason people joke about Nash having the 5 moves of doom, if you include the hair flip. In this case, it was 4 moves, because Nash's hair wasn't even long enough by this point to even do the hair flip. He still had the mullet by this point. He did some elbows in the corner, an extended bear hug that lasted about an hour, a big boot, and a jackknife powerbomb. that was it. So let the record show, when you hear people joshing about the 5 moves of doom, it wasn't Cena that originated that. Kevin Nash was doing that same shit in 1994. But, again, he's obviously being positioned for a title match with Razor. So, and you had to figure they were going to give him the squash win. But that was at least short. And then right before their commercial pitch, after Vince did another hotline plug, here comes Jerry the King Lawler, returning to television after months of being away due to controversial circumstance. But he's coming out being carried on his little throne dealia bob. And funny enough, who are one of the 2 boys heading the charge at the front? Dwayne Gill and D'Lo Brown. My man D'Lo. Good to see him. God, what a babyface he had here in 1994. Clean shaven, not a speck of facial hair to be seen. And, this is still a few years out from when he would debut on WWF television as a member of the Nation. I don't even think he was wrestling a full year in the business by this point. He was a puppy with big paws, though. And here he is in 94 doing Waterboy duty, being a surrogate to carry out Lawler on a gimmick throne. It's funny sometimes. You never notice this kind of stuff when you're a kid, but then you look back at the tapes years later and you're like, holy shit, that's D'Lo Brown. And this is so awesome. Lawler never straying away from allowing himself to look like a jackass on camera. As the job geeks are trying to lower the platform so Lawler could step off and enter the ring for his King's Court segment. And right before they cut to break, all you see is Lawler go ass over tea kettle onto the floor. He just completely vanishes off camera while the job guys are going over to attend to him. And this is so genius because you knew there was a commercial break coming up. There was probably like 2 or 3 minutes of dead air time before Lawler actually spoke a word in the ring. So I would not have been shocked if Lawler was out there selling and berating the fans while they were during the break, only to come back for Lawler to start the actual segment. I mean, it's better than standing in the ring beating your dick off, which is what everybody does nowadays. See, Lawler knew what he was doing. He was always one step ahead of the curb. And even when they get back to the ring, Lawler's fixing his hair and trying to readjust his crown, standing there scolding the fans and tell him to quit laughing or he'll go up and slap every one of them. So, this is classic heel Memphis Lawler for about a minute or two. He's obviously stalling for time, waiting for his guests to interrupt him. And finally, out comes Lex Luger to talk some business with the King. Not before engaging in some playful comedy. Luger's out there trying to have a good laugh and make a mockery of the whole King's Court gimmick, sitting on Lawler's throne and intentionally butchering the name of the talk show. And it was all kind of lighthearted slapstick comedy. But Lawler's more focused on drilling Luger for everything that's been going down with Kurt Hennig. Luger's come out and publicly addressed that he's convinced that Mr. Perfect had a personal grudge with him. And while Luger might see it one way, the King actually goes back with Mr. Perfect. And he can assure everybody that Luger is full of crap. What Perfect did at WrestleMania was all done in good faith. And it was Luger that instigated the DQ call. This is great. And they're showing the replay footage of the conclusion to the Luger-Yoko match. And it's all being called from a biased perspective clearly. I mean, we all saw that match. We know what happened. But Lawler's out there trying to play up from the heel perspective and saying that Luger's at fault for everything that went down. But, but Luger kind of reiterated previous talking points when it came to the issue with Mr. Perfect. Picked the wrong time and the wrong place to fuck with him. And All he's looking for is an opportunity for Mr. Perfect to grow a spine, get out of that suit, put on a pair of wrestling trunks, and meet Luger in the ring so they can settle the beef one-on-one. And much like I've been talking about when it comes to this program, this is all being extraordinarily well done to build up a feud and or match that never happens. Which again is kind of where the historical retrospective has its drawbacks. You know, sitting here trying to get amped up for a feud that never comes to pass. I mean, you kind of look back at all these segments and you're like, it's kind of a waste of TV time. I mean, if anything, it was good seeing Lawler back. Good God, I forgot how much I miss listening to bitter douchebag Jerry Lawler cut heel promos on Raw. He's like the best part of the show by a country mile. I certainly missed Lawler more than I did Sparkplug Bob Holly. Good God. Can't even say that name without throwing up in my mouth a little bit. And to be quite frank, I can't think of a lot of people back in the day that craved seeing Sparky Plug. And as I said when we started seeing all the race car vignettes air on TV, get ready for more of it. Because this shit's in for the long haul, baby. You'll be seeing and hearing plenty more about Sparkplug Bob Holly for years to come. So this was another one of those classic Raw segments where there's an obvious match taking place in the ring, but the announcers are spending more time talking about completely unrelated material. Here they had Mr. Perfect on the phone. And again, Hennig's doing his best Donald Trump impersonation by talking about how perfectly he called the match in Mania with Luger and Yokozuna. It was a perfectly called match, folks. Some say the most perfectly called match in all of wrestling. That's what some people say. I certainly wouldn't say that, but that's what I hear. So I was cracking up listening to this. I also like the back and forth jabs with Hennig and Savage. You know, Savage talking about how Hennig couldn't be put in charge of officiating a Little League baseball game without fucking up a bad call. And again, you know, it's important to keep context in mind here. Yes, the material's fantastic, but when you remember that it never ends up going anywhere beyond the promo battles, spending time talking about it is almost kind of redundant. And again, all of this is far more interesting than Sparkplug Bob Holly versus Barry Horowitz. Good Lord. This is the shit they were doing in 1994 in the WWF. Holly won with the diving knee drop. I literally wrote nothing else down about the match. Aside from a comment here about Bob Holly needing new ring gear. And that was all followed with more hokey comedy with all the tag teams ahead of the main event. And they're still counting the fan votes to see which team is getting challenged for the belts. And in order to set this up, they also have to present this in very cartoonish fashion. So you got the Quebecers in the back heckling some of the guys tallying up the votes. Meanwhile, those guys are on the phone the entire time. And you got Jacques Pierre and Johnny Polo literally screaming in their ear the entire time, telling them to hurry up and count. Then they cut to the shot of Men on a Mission, the Bushwhackers, and the Smoking Guns hanging out in the locker room. And they're all looking at the camera, acting all goofy. You know, trying to convince people to vote for them. I'm sitting there like, how in the fuck did I watch this shit growing up? Must have had a high threshold for mental anguish when I was a kid. Maybe that's why I'm so jaded here in my 30s. Because I saw all this crap happen when I was like 7 years old. Grew up figuring that nothing could be any more annoying than over-the-top garbage cartoon characters on WWF television. Little did I know what I was in store for. Certainly nothing could have been more annoying than Men on a Mission's theme music. Oh yeah, spoiler. Guess who got the title shot? It's, I mean, when you look at the three options, Isn't it kind of picking between the lesser of three evils by that point? And to be honest, there really wasn't even any suspense. It's like, well, duh. Men on a Mission got screwed out of the title match at WrestleMania, so obviously they were going to get a second title shot. Tell you the truth, I spent most of the match trying to figure out why Johnny Polo had an eye patch on. Like, he came out at the beginning with the champs, and his left eye is covered up. And I'm sitting there like, did I miss an angle off camera? The hell's wrong with this dude's eye? Unless he was trying to champion Pierre. Because, well, we kind of all know the story about him. But, I don't think we ever found out what happened to Johnny Polo. He just had an eye patch on for whatever reason. And they proceeded to have a match. And indeed, it definitely was a match. Whether or not it was good is sort of left up to subjective opinion. I still, for the life of me, will never be able to get over how much the fans love this Men on a Mission group. The ring attire alone is enough for me to say, maybe this gimmick isn't for me. And then I hear the rapping from Oscar, and I'm like, yeah, this gimmick definitely isn't suited for me. But these WWF fans, they just couldn't get enough of it. And the match got a decent length of time. In comparison to the Mania match, I'd say it was maybe slightly better, if not purely for the decisive finish at the end. They ended up doing a double heat spot, Mo and Mabel, successively. You know, fans were into the hot tags and the babyface comebacks. The ending was a bit chaotic, and that's par for the course when it comes to tag matches, especially the higher caliber main event matches. They do a spot where Mo gets dumped out to the floor. It was weird, too, because Mo takes the bump over the top rope. He lands perfectly on his feet. And then for some reason, he just sort of stumbled over toward the barricade and basically took a flat back bump where he came precariously close to smacking his head off the guardrail, which probably would have been no fun. But it was very weird. Somewhere during that, Mabel was giving chase to Johnny Polo for whatever reason. I don't know. And while that distraction was happening, the Quebecers did something to Mo in the ring and pinned him. I think they hit their double-assisted flipping senton leg drop combo. Whatever that move's called. It was all right. Harmless enough. You know, the people really wanted the title switch at the end, but this is the WWF we're talking about. You know, when's the last time you ever expected a positive outcome to a title match? Cody Rhodes will tell you all about that one. Honestly, there just wasn't much to say beyond that. My memory of the whole tag title picture around this point is so scant. You know, the division itself around this point was just beyond appalling. Like, worse than AEW's tag division at the current moment. Just bad comedy duo after bad comedy duo after bad comedy duo. I mean, they had teams, but my God, the depth, the talent pool just wasn't there. And we'll be talking about the Crockett Cup later on. You know, talk about the difference between the way Vince McMahon saw tag team wrestling versus what was happening in the NWA in the late 80s. It's not even compatible. The Quebecers have been champions for a while now, so, I mean, you knew Vince obviously liked having the belts on them. Hopefully not for wanting to hear that wretched Mountie theme music every week. Because I'm usually okay with the Quebecers matches until I have to hear that theme music, and then I about lose my shit. But, you know, again, it wasn't all that shocking of a finish to see the heels retain. Yeah, they already teased the feud with them and the Head Shrinkers a few weeks ago, so I'm sure we'll see them popping up at some point to restate their challenge. In the meantime, guess we can close out this epic falderall. Factoring in that it was Easter time, what better way to end the show than with a little bit of a company PR segment? An Easter egg hunt at the White House with Doink, Dink, the Bushwhackers, and every other bad comedy act that they could dish out to scare away the kiddos. Tell you what, man. I had to run from Dink and Doink before I ever ran from the Easter Bunny. This was... Well, for one, it was very weird seeing Hillary Clinton when she was in her late 40s or early 50s. I almost forgot what old videos and photos of her looked like. I mean, Bill always looked old to me. He certainly didn't age well when you look at more modern pictures of him. I mean, Hillary wasn't Blake Lively or anything, but yeah, she looked all right for her late 40s. She still had the personality of a brick wall, but I mean, that's most politicians for you. Looked like fun, though. All those kids hanging out on the lawn, hunting for Easter eggs at the White House. I mean, better than Bill than with Joe Biden hanging around. He'd be out there sniffing hair and doing whatever else creepy old men do whenever children are around. But we're not going to get into that for the sake of getting targeted by YouTube fact checkers. So that show sucked. If I already didn't make that abundantly clear from the top. Jerry Lawler was the highlight. But, God. I mean, Jerry Lawler being the best part of a Monday Night Raw show in 1994. It's like what we've been talking about with how the Bloodline has been the best thing on SmackDown all year. What's that really saying? It's apples to oranges comparisons. This is just... It goes back to the talking point of the fact that this is a lull period for the WWF. And it only gets progressively worse over the next couple of years. And while I certainly have my criticisms of the Attitude Era, my God, dude. Lord knows I'll be craving that shit by the time 97 rolls around. And then there's SmackDown. Speak of the devil. And boy howdy, what can you say about SmackDown? We already made the joke, Vince is back. And now that I'm actually seeing it unfold in real time, boy, does that ever become more abundantly clear. The stench of VKM was doused all over this fucking thing. You know, I already read and heard about the Raw nightmares. People talking about how Vince's fingerprints were all over the script for that program. Whew. I believe it. And here on SmackDown a few days later, the colors of the brand logo may have changed. But it was definitely a Vince show. Y'all remember how I used to bitch and moan about them always starting off the show with the Brawling Brutes every week? It was like a trend for 8 weeks in a row where every SmackDown would start off with something involving Sheamus, Butch, and or Ridge Holland. Whether it's tag action, singles action, doesn't matter. Literally so we could just hear Michael Cole scream, "It's fight night!" So, in the most uncreative way imaginable to possibly kick off the show, guess who was in 6-man tag action? That's right. The Brawling Brutes. They faced all the Imperium guys. Because we haven't seen the same combination of these motherfuckers fighting for like the past 6 to 8 months. We just saw that great 3-way Intercontinental title match at the WrestleMania with Drew, Sheamus, and Gunther. One of the best 3-ways I've seen executed in a wrestling company in Lord knows how long. So, of course, 5 days later, it's right back to the well with the same fucking people feuding. Now they're just throwing in all the understudies of the two groups. the lackeys, as I like to call them. And I love Gunther. Sheamus is fine, I guess. But the surrounding four guys on both teams, every time I see them at this point, I just groan. Kaiser and Vinci are the same two bumbling flunkies they've always been. And Butch and Holland are literally the embodiment of just dudes on this show. They've been background players since the time I started watching their stuff on SmackDown. Nothing's changed. I still don't care about them. And moreover, I still don't care about the Brawling Brutes. Or Imperium, for that matter. They did a bunch of chaotic six-way spots for a while. The match went for fucking ever. And of all the finishes to go with, it's Sheamus pinning Giovanni Vinci. Why? Beats the heck out of me. I guess all to set up Sheamus versus Gunther for the Intercontinental title. Probably at the WrestleMania Backlash show, since technically Sheamus did not get pinned in that three-way. Plus, I guess people are still clamoring for those guys to have a third match. All right. I mean, the match they had in Cardiff was really good. We reviewed it on the channel. It's up there right now if you want to hear me talk about it. You know, the second match they had on TV wasn't as good, but the people still enjoyed it from what I remember. At this point, though, if they are going to have a third match in the series, wow. I mean, I wouldn't advise it, but I mean, you almost kind of have to put the belt on Sheamus, right? What's that going to be? His fourth title match in the span of like 5 months? I mean, the story kind of writes itself because we've been hearing Sheamus talk about how the IC title is the only belt he hasn't won in the WWE. It's one of those crowning achievements he's looking to obtain to solidify his career. Again, I don't think it's a wise move. I wouldn't have Gunther drop the IC title to anybody in the upcoming future. Maybe save Cody and or Braun Breaker from NXT. Those are really the only two I can think of. Sheamus, I mean, you could put the belt on him, and it would sort of fit the mold of the story, but, I mean, let's be real, too. Do you honestly expect WWE to give us a happy, satisfying payoff to Sheamus' lifelong dream of holding every major championship in the company? Come on now. How long have you been watching this product? Give me a break. But we'll see what they do. Following that was the Cody Rhodes Obliteration tribute that they aired on Monday night. And, well, I've seen the footage. I've seen the comments. I've seen pretty much everything there is to see on the matter. I'm not shocked. I mean, as soon as I saw the setup to the tag match with Solo and Roman against Brock and Cody, the first thing I said was, so is the goal to intentionally make Cody look like the world's biggest goddamn idiot? You're telling me that he never saw that coming? You're telling me he just presumed that Brock was going to randomly help him out and come to his aid to wrestle Roman and Solo on free television? 24 hours after having to carry No Moss's ass to a semi-passable match? Brock doesn't do business like that, brother. Cody should have known better. I mean, albeit the idea of Cody versus Lesnar probably sounds enticing to some people on paper, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I would rather see it with Cody as the actual champion, but that's just my take. But as we talked about before, man, the Vince McMahon influence. His dirty fingerprints were all over that monstrosity. Here's what we're going to do, pal. Brock's going to go out there and decimate Cody for 5 minutes straight. He's going to F5 him on the steel steps in the middle of the ring and lay him out like a geek. That'll get Cody over with the people. It's such good shit. I'm sure Vince's mustache told him that. So while that's happening on the Raw side of things, I'll just be over here reporting on whatever scraps are left of the Bloodline story before Vince evidently fucks that one up too. He's doing a fine job of it. If you saw this show, you know what I'm talking about. So right now, they're teasing the idea that the Usos might be next on the chopping block of the Tribal Chief. We had Paul Heyman and Solo Sikoa in the back here with Kayla Braxton. Kayla sounding a lot more fake and scripted in her interview delivery than normal. Did anybody else pick up on that, or was I the only one? It's got to be a Vince call. Telling her to be more boisterous with her intonation. Sounded beyond phony. While Paulie's blabbering on about stuff that I kind of blanked out on, in walks Jay, and he's excited to get a chance to solve the Sami Zayn problem in the main event. But while he's wondering where his backup reinforcement is in Jimmy Uso, Paulie tells him that Jimmy was told to stay at home and watch while Jay got the job done by himself. And after he walks off, Heyman just turns to Solo and goes, "And if Jay doesn't get finished dealing with the Sami Zayn problem, you're going to go out there and take care of our current problems." And while that was all well and good, once you get past the obvious complaint to them essentially doing Sami versus Jay again on free TV, literally 5 days after we just saw the same match essentially in the main event of WrestleMania Night 1. But, I mean, you at least see where they're probably going with the Bloodline story. Keyword probably. At least as of now. Before Vince evidently changes his mind and does something completely out of left field for no reason. And then we had Ricochet versus Frodo of the Viking Raiders, with Van Halen in ringside, getting ready to perform her magical spells and or witchcraft bullshittery. Because y'all remember that angle weeks back on TV where Van Halen spooked Ricochet just by standing there and trying to be menacing, all 5 feet, 110 pounds of her. And while I was sitting here trying to think of some semi-constructive ways to possibly revamp some of the Viking Raiders' piss-poor booking since they came back to the company, Ricochet hit Frodo with a shooting star press and pinned him clean. And I immediately ripped up my piece of paper that I had sitting on my desk and tossed that right in the trash can. I even broke out the old lead pencil for that one. The napkin method of booking that Heyman used to talk about when he would be hanging out with the boys at diners and he'd be trying to book matches for television. It's actually a good story if you read about it in your spare time. But it was all for naught. All right, at this point, can we call a spade a spade? Can anybody rationally endorse WWE re-signing the Viking Raiders? Or are they pretty much dead in the water by this point? I mean, it doesn't get much worse than the proverbial jobber treatment. But that was that. Then we had a quick little pre-tape in the back with Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, where Sami felt an obligation to try and hash things out with Jey Uso before the main event, instead of just going out there and settling the score once and for all like Owens tried to suggest. That way they can put all the Bloodline stuff behind them and move on to something else. There's probably an underlying hidden message there. Move on! That was the message. But, no, instead, Sami wants to talk. He wants to have a conversation, probably over a hot cup of joe. At least that's what we were left with by the time the segment ended. We'll cover the story as it unfolds, but Sammy was right about one thing here. They beat the Usos for the tag straps. They ended their long reign as undisputed tag team champions, and yet, now that I see them with the belts in real time, something definitely feels a bit off about it. And I think I know what the issue is. The issue is that they have no good teams to feud with, because they have nothing but lame duck challengers. But that's also kind of the current state of modern tag team wrestling, right? It ain't doing so hot on the other channel either, but I mean, at least they have FTR over there. So after this, we had some girls action that I kind of dipped out on. I mean, I kept it on in the TV in the background, but I was, preoccupied with other matters. In other words, not watching this match. And that all led to the Hunter promo. They announced at the top of the program that he had a special announcement to make. And I instantly thought, oh God, not him too. What is it with the executives and their goddamn special announcements that aren't special at all? And they're barely even announcements most of the time. Honestly, I thought he was just going to go out there and say, well, everyone, Vince is back. Nice knowing you. Catch you on the flip side. Nah, instead he took a few minutes to put over the WrestleMania 39 gate and the record-breaking viewership success. Did all the typical corporate lingo, greatest WrestleMania of all time, yada yada, the same shit we hear every year. No, it wasn't. And the major groundbreaking announcement, the news that, in Hunter's words, will forever change the landscape of the WWE. It's draft season. Yeah. That was the big announcement. The 2023 WWE Draft is coming up in a few weeks. Because, apparently that's a thing people still take seriously, to some effect. Yeah, the deal where we're supposed to get excited once a year because we might see wrestlers get bounced around to different brands. Raw stars might become exclusive to SmackDown and vice versa. We might see some NXT call-ups, which is usually where the bigger news comes into play with that. And it would be one thing if brand exclusivity actually was legit, but we all know that's BS because we see guys jumping ship between brands every fucking week on this show like it's nothing. And Roman and Solo were literally just on Raw this past Monday night, even though I'm pretty sure Solo was supposed to be SmackDown exclusive. We've seen Cody bounce back and forth between both brands. And Rhea Ripley shows up on Raw and SmackDown all the time. So, okay. Yeah, the draft is coming up. Yippee. Does anyone give a fuck? Like, who cares? Haven't we already learned that this thing is bogus? I mean, every year we're sold the same bill of goods. This year, the draft matters. Only to come to find out that it doesn't because, WWE lies. It's kind of their thing. Moreover, Vince changes his mind on a whim, so you can't ever expect things to pan out as initially planned. So that was just a waste of 5 minutes, Hunter's entrance included, which took about 4 of those 5 minutes. And as far as the Rhea bit goes, well, also factoring in the rest of the Judgment Day, because unfortunately that faction is still a thing. We got to hear all of them in some form or fashion do a promo here. Rhea's boasting about beating Charlotte at WrestleMania and solidifying herself as the top G. Finn Balor's wondering where Edge is, even though he won the Hell in a Cell match. Which I also wondered. Why is Balor out here doing a promo less than a week after he just did a job to Edge inside the cell? And Edge is nowhere to be seen? That is a good question, in fact. Dom's promo, I more or less could not figure out what he was saying for the first part because the people were just raining down the parade of boos on this poor fucker. That was at least mildly entertaining. Like Balor telling him to take his time and not be in a rush. Dom did a fucking awesome slimy heat promo once all the people calmed down, saying that he pulled his punches against his dad because he just couldn't wield up the ability to hurt Ray. What kind of dad hits his own son? Almost an exact quote, by the way. I fucking love Dom. He's the best. And, right before Damian Priest chimed in, they showed the little angle from Raw this past week where Bad Bunny tried to punk out Dom, and then Priest ended up putting him through the timekeeper's table. I'm sorry, it was the announcer's table, not the timekeeper's table. But as expected, this feud is going to be a thing now. That was a gnarly bump he took through the table, too. Looked kind of rough on the landing. Hope he didn't hurt anything. Priest's promo was mildly underwhelming. Half of it was in Spanish, and the punchline at the end was kind of blasé. All of this to conveniently set up a tag team match, playa. Stop me if you heard me say this already. A tag match featuring guys that already fucking wrestled at the pay-per-view. Do y'all remember when WrestleMania was the culmination to rivalries? Then the guys would go their separate ways afterwards and move on to new programs. Remember when that was a thing? Yeah, good times. It's Rey and Santos Escobar versus Dom and Priest. Less than a week after seeing Dom and Rey wrestle on night one, now they're fighting less than a week later on free TV with literally zero build. And while, yes, it was within the confines of a tag match, it's still Rey versus Dom in some capacity. You know, Dom tried to play keep away and chicken shit for the first part of the match to avoid getting in the ring with Rey, but, I mean, they still wound up facing off, so, I don't know. Like, why would anybody care about the next time these guys face off in a premium live special when they're literally just touching on free TV? More so, I'm trying to figure out why we needed to see this match again when we just saw Rey beat Dom clean. Now throwing Bad Bunny into the equation and making it more about him instead of the Rey versus Dom feud, which is kind of how we got here. Now they're kind of throwing Rey on the back burner to try to get over Bad Bunny versus Dom Mysterio, which I don't know about all that. I mean, the tag match here just kind of existed. The Latino World Order shit is so dumb. It was a bad parody act on Nitro over 20 years ago, and now WWE's trying to replicate it in 2023 because it has ties to Eddie. Literally during one of the worst periods of WCW when all that shit was going down. So, of course, now I'm having to be reminded of it again. I like to hear the typical WWE formula for commercial pitches, too. Rey and Escobar do stereo dives out to the floor onto the heels. So, of course, they come back from break. Heels are just randomly in control. Not even bothering to show how the faces got cut off or what happened during the break. Just heels are now in control for literally no reason. And they did some spots for a while. Evidently, with all the goofballs hanging out at ringside, you knew they were bound to get involved. There was a deal where Rhea pulled Dom out of the way of a 619. Zelina Vega then came in and gave Rhea Hurricane Rana off the apron, which was beyond ridiculous. Fucking 90-pound girl taking Rhea off her feet with literally no issue. And while the girls fought off, Dom did a blind tag to Priest, so when Escobar tried to pick up Dom into a fireman's carry, Priest snuck in the back door, caught him with the South of Heaven chokeslam, and pinned him. Yeah. Well, at least the Ray Dom match at Mania was good. I'm just going to keep reissuing the same idea that keeps running through my head. For all the people that are frustrated that the show is evidently going to shit the bed in a hurry, you know what? Instead of getting pissed about it, enjoy the decline. Just drink it in, man. Drink it in. If you think it's bad now, ooh, just you wait. Just you wait. Thankfully, there's not much more to go. We had the main event with Sami Zayn and Jey Uso, but first they shot an angle in the back beforehand where Sami tried to confront Jey by gorilla, again, to try and talk with him, because, well, this is typical of baby faces, right? They tried to look for excuses to not wrestle the bad guys. Meanwhile, the heel, the guy that we're supposed to hate in this scenario, he's ready to go. Ready to lock horns with the good guy. And instead of Jey dropping Sami right then and there while he had a clear shot, instead he stood there to hear him out. You know, and Sami's talking about how Jay's letting everything crumble underneath of him, and it's only a matter of time before the bloodline take him out too. And all he has to do is listen to Sami. And while this little interplay was going on, we hear in the background what appeared to be the atomic bomb going off in the arena, a giant loud thud, followed by a metal clang sound, followed by people screaming and all kinds of pandemonium ensuing. And Sami runs down the corridor over to the mysterious Scooby-Doo crime scene. Conveniently enough, there's Kevin Owens underneath one of those heavy equipment cases. His leg is trapped underneath of it. And in the background, you see Solo Sikoa getting fended off by like half the goddamn roster. Meanwhile, Kevin's there having to sell the ankle with literally nobody attending to him for like a straight minute. And finally, Sami calls over for the doctors to give him some help. And Jey Uso's just kind of hovering over the scene, very stone-faced. And, I mean, my God, there was so much wrong with this. Beyond the execution of the angle, it's actually kind of hilarious if you think about it. Like, Sami's best friend literally just got jumped and injured 20 seconds before he has to go out there and wrestle. They come back from break. Jey Uso is already in the ring. And Sami is in such a hurry to go out there and beat the shit out of Jey Uso to prove a point that he has to wait for his theme music to play. Of course, he comes out with his entrance music. The people are all excited and happy. They're singing the theme. They're all on their feet clapping and smiling and cheering. Sami's all fired up and showing off the tag belts to the crowd, posing on the turnbuckle, the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, so are we just not concerned at this point that Kevin's hurt? Are we already over it? I'll tell you what, I'm over it. I was kind of over this shit before the bell even rang. My God. And Sami is so angry. He is so set to get revenge on behalf of his fallen comrade and tag team partner Kevin Owens, the guy that he just won the tag belts at WrestleMania with. He begins the match with Jey by going straight to the collar and elbow tie-up. I'm like, oh my God. they're actually going to have a wrestling match. After all the shit we've seen between these guys. No, now is the point where we must have a wrestling match. Good. Yeah, because that's exactly the thing you would expect to see when a guy's been seeking revenge on behalf of a friend that got brutally attacked earlier. I mean, in all fairness, it's not to say the match was bad, but like, did this have the feel of a grudge match between two rivals that can't stand one another? Again, after all the shit we've seen the Bloodline put Sammy and KO through in the last 2 or 3 months, I mean, it certainly didn't have the heat that the WrestleMania match did. Which I guess boils all this down to a simple question. Why was this match booked? Because you needed a main event? Okay, here's a better idea. Why do the match? Just have Jay and Sammy get into a fight in the back, have the fight spill out to ringside, Solo Sikoa comes down and jumps Sammy on the 2-on-1 beatdown. They tease that they're about to put Sammy out, just like they did to KO. And then you do the surprise save at the end of the show like you did. You didn't need the match. And you certainly didn't need to beat fucking Sammy. Less than a week after he just won the fucking tag straps. My God. Yep. They did it. They did it. They actually beat Sammy here. Can't make this shit up, folks. You cannot. So that was head scratching. And as far as the run-in thing at the end with Matt Riddle, again, just another textbook case that Vince is overseeing things again. We all know Vince's weird obsession with Riddle's goofiness. Going back to those segments with Randy Orton months back. I mean, Vince definitely got a kick out of the guy. I mean, to be fair, I like Riddle. I think he's very entertaining. I don't have a problem with him. Some people don't like the gimmick. It's an acquired taste. I mean, I happen to think Riddle's a pretty good athlete, which is mainly why I like him. There is the layered bit of comedy when he's doing promos because you literally never know what the fuck the guy's going to do or say. Like, he's got that Scott Steiner unpredictability to him. Yeah, but he's back now after being out of action for months. And there was a kayfabe reason he was out. I can't remember what it was. Was it rehab? I think I read that somewhere. No. Hope he's better, because they're going to be pushing him in the main event scene again. That rehab better been worth it. And, it does kind of tie in with the story detail. So, it's not like this was just completely random. It is what it is. If it's setting up some kind of 6-man tag at the next live special with the Usos and Solo against Owens, Sammy, and Riddle. Okay. I mean, that's more of a TV main event than it is the main event of a WrestleMania Backlash show. Not the direction I would have taken this feud. I mean, I honestly thought they were going to sort of move Owens and Zayn away from the Usos onto something else. That was sort of the more logical conclusion. But, nah, apparently we're going to milk this thing for another 12 months. Just beat that dead fucking horse to death. We'll see. To be honest with you, out of everything I saw in this show, the one thing that kind of intrigued me above all else is figuring out what they end up doing with Solo. I mean, the finish to WrestleMania kind of changed a little bit of my perspective on the matter. If their game plan really is to have him be the one to dethrone Roman, I mean, they're taking a big risk trying to hold this off for another year. We'll see how the crowd receives it. I mean, that's definitely a Vince call. But the question is, are the fans going to take to it? I don't know, man. I mean, it would make sense from a storyline standpoint, but as good as the Bloodline's been, I mean, I talked about the whole shit or get out the pot scenario. WrestleMania 39 was kind of the way to wrap all this up and sort of phase the Bloodline out of the equation altogether. I mean, Solo and Roman as a program could be good, but the guy's not ready yet. And how many opportunities are you going to pass up on in the meantime? Personally, I'd rather see Braun Breaker be the guy to beat Roman for the belt rather than Solo Sikoa. But hey, that's just my take on it. You can gather your own opinions on the matter. I'm sure everybody's going to have different perspectives, so maybe some people will buy it. And again, I'm not opposed to the idea. I just think for where we are right now, I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit here. I mean, changing course of direction this rapidly and removing Cody from the equation altogether, again, it's a risky move. Because what do you do with Cody? You just going back to making him the career mid-carder like all those video packages were propping him up to be? And the whole goal and the whole long-term story of him winning the belt for his daddy, winning the big one at the grand stage, that's all just getting cast to the wayside now, apparently. I mean, I don't know. We will see. So that was SmackDown. It was SmackDown. Good grief. And that was just one show post WrestleMania. Lord knows what I'm going to be in store for the remainder of the summer. But again, I don't know how hands-on Vince is going to be with creative going forward, but there were some suspect decisions being made on this one. And again, like I talked about before, man, every single feud, it's a carryover. WrestleMania 39, the alleged biggest pay-per-view of the year for this company, where you would think that all storylines are intended to come to a head. Apparently not this year. Apparently it's WrestleMania 39, Raw rolls on, the tagline, where every rivalry rolls on. But I guess that kind of fits with the gimmick of WrestleMania Backlash because, I mean, you're bound to have at least a couple rematches here and there. I mean, which I'm not opposed to. Like, I'm not totally against the idea of maybe doing 1 or 2 rematches from WrestleMania, especially if you had cases where the heel went over and screwy finish. I mean, yes, of course, there's always going to be room for growth there, but every single feud, with the exception of Cody and Roman, which is probably the one match coming out of that show that everybody wanted to see a rematch for. But of course, we're not going to get that. Now we're going to get Brock and Cody, which, I hope Cody has a first-class ticket to Suplex City, because that's going to be the story of that match. And the rest is there to fill the void, I guess. Well, said I was going to cover some of this Crockett Cup footage from '87. At least the content that was available on YouTube at the time. It's interesting because I think if you actually search in the tab for Crockett Cup 1986, you would actually find the entire 4-hour event, pretty much from beginning to end with no cuts. You know, there may have been a few prelim matches that were edited from the final release, but as far as I know, I think that was the original release for the WWE Network, right before they switched over to Peacock and basically scrubbed a lot of the classic archives. The 87 footage, from what I was able to find, they cut a lot of stuff out. In both nights, they pretty much reduced everything to about 90 minutes of content per video, which I did not expect. I thought I was going to be doing a lot more fast forwarding than normal. And, I ended up skipping over some stuff, but I figured I'd have enough material here to warrant giving it its own discussion portion of the show. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, I'm not going to give a detailed analysis of everything that happened, but I will kind of go over the highlights of the footage they aired for both of the videos here. And again, this is all before pay-per-view, so the stuff that's on YouTube is sort of the raw deal, which I liked. Going back and watching old school territorial tapes from live events and seeing all that grainy footage from the nosebleed sections of the buildings, whether it's Memphis, Mid-South, Florida, never mattered. It was always a more authentic, cut and dry feel. And, you see so much stuff that's so watered down nowadays. I don't know. It's nice going back and seeing this stuff in real time. The audio was horrible, but, I like the laid-back, natural interaction between the interviewers and the wrestlers, too. The footage they gathered here was from an NBC satellite feed. So, when they cut to the ring for the matches, there was no commentary. The only thing we heard was the crowd reaction and whatever sounds the boys were making when they were bumping around the ring. Again, the natural, organic vibe. Just like you're in the venue watching the stuff take place in real time. And again, it's something you don't really appreciate until you watch modern wrestling, just see how artificial everything is anymore. Then you go back and see raw territorial footage and you're like, man, I miss the old days. But we'll start from the top and kind of gloss over the key takeaways. Now, keep in mind, the 87 Crockett Cup in Baltimore was a 2-night event. However, with the footage that they split in between the two videos on YouTube, it kind of looks like they condensed everything down. So you really have no way of judging what matches took place on night 1 versus night 2. I mean, there were a couple hints here and there, like the Midnight Express had different gear on, so you could kind of figure out which one was night 1 versus night 2, but there really wasn't a whole lot of way to differentiate the two shows. Not that that's a bad thing at all, but again, love the live takes on the interviews. George Michael was the interviewer in Baltimore, and they had various clips of him spliced throughout the day, doing interviews with Ric Flair, Jim Cornette, the Midnights, Mike Rotunda. We had Magnum TA show up for a cameo here, and everyone's running down the big day and talking about how exciting it is to be back in Baltimore, the whole 9 yards. The cuts and edits in between interviews is great too, because before they'd start, you'd see a little bit of the fourth wall breaking where George would have to stop and start again because the camera wasn't rolling. Then the wrestlers would be breaking kayfabe and laughing about certain things. And again, it was a more authentic, sports-driven approach, and I appreciated that. And like I said, they cut a lot of the prelim opening round matches on this thing, which I was fine with. I think the first one they aired was a second round match with the Road Warriors beating Tijo Khan and Shaska Watley. My boy Tijo. Good to see him back. Haven't talked about him in a hot minute on Crockett TV. Now, he obviously left the region by that point. He was doing work elsewhere. I think he may have been in Florida by that point. Don't quote me on that. Watley, too, wasn't around Crockett all that frequently by this point. But they were mostly there to get served up to Hawk and Animal, and that was fun for a while it lasted. But the first match I actually watched from start to finish was the Sweet Stan Beautiful Bobby versus Garvin Brothers match. Actually getting to hear the original Midnight Express theme, too, instead of the WWE Can Music version from the network. And I mainly wanted to check this out because it was a chance to talk about Stan Lane coming into the fold as Bobby's replacement partner after Dennis left. Stan literally just debuted on Crockett TV this past week. Um, and this is so great because it's almost like recounting that classic Road Warriors Midnight Express match from last year's Crockett Cup. The whole thing was just Bobby and Dennis bumping around and selling for Hawk and Animal the entire time. Pretty much the same thing happened here with Ronnie and Jimmy. Garvin's came out and immediately went on the attack. They're hammering away on the heels. Stan and Bobby are bumping around like crazy. You got the great visuals where Ronnie's trying to go after Jim Cornette and pull him over the top rope by his necktie, chasing him around ringside. Crowds just pissing themselves the entire time this is all going on. It's hot from the jump. Things finally settle down for a bit and they get into the actual wrestling part of the match. We get to see a little more of the Stan Bobby chemistry come into the fold here. They got the heat sequence on Jimmy until Ronnie made the big save. And they had a great heat finish where Ronnie gave Bobby the knockout punch. Bobby takes a great spill out to the floor. And when Ronnie goes out to try and give him the pile driver, here comes Corny from behind to hit him in the back with the tennis racket. Down goes Ronnie. Bobby slides back into the ring while the ref counts Ronnie out. And after the Midnights get the count-out win, the Garvins are right back in there to clean house again. Ronnie immediately tries to go after Cornette. The Midnights weasel their way out before any further damage can be ensued. So they're still building up that program nicely. Simple but really effective. I think I counted the match went like 5 minutes, if that. But the crowd loved every bit of it. It was just go, go, go from start to finish. And that's what I loved about every single one of these tournament matches, man. There was no downtime. Just from bell to bell, they kept things moving. Exactly how it should be. Keep the energy high. Keep the fans into it. You don't need to needlessly drag shit out for 15 to 20 minutes. Just give the fans everything they need, keep it in that short window, and move right on. Got that great visual at the end where Ronnie's going after Tommy Young and laying him out with a knockout punch, and you got gorgeous Jimmy in there trying to restrain and hold him back, and it's good stuff. Really, really good stuff. Hopefully we'll be hearing more about that one on television. Ronnie getting physical with the official. The next match they aired was the Bullet Bob Brad Armstrong versus Kevin Sullivan Arn Anderson round. Very different match from the previous one, but this is also very good. We'll be talking about this a lot more as we go through the Kevin Sullivan library, but he's not exactly somebody you would classify as a great in-ring technician, but he always had a presence in the ring. He wasn't the biggest guy in the world, but he was legit. It's hard to see a lot of that pan out with the fan camera footage, but he had such an intensity and an ability to really sell facials. And like we talked about before, not the best promo in the world, but the guy was really solid in the ring. Bullet Bob wasn't a spring chicken by this point either, but, he could more so get away with it because of how naturally over he was with the crowd. Like, he had that built-in respect and admiration from the fans after all the years he put into the business. And, while this wasn't a particularly great match or anything, didn't need to be. Everyone got to shine. Brad got to score the sunset pin on Sullivan at the end while Arn was being held back by Bullet Bob. All made sense. The Armstrongs were sort of going into this thing as the underdogs because everyone was immediately counting them out of it. But now they're here scoring wins and advancing in the brackets and facing the more experienced, higher profile tag teams. Some really good work those guys did together. The Mod Squad Tully and Luger match was more or less unimpressive. The best worker in the thing by a country mile was Tully, and even so, he really didn't have much to work with going up against Spiker and Basher, a.k.a. the Jeffers twins. The heel versus heel dynamic was a little strange, too. Kind of made it hard for the people to figure out who they were supposed to cheer. Judging by Dundee's interference at the end, I guess Tully and Luger were the de facto babyfaces here. which again was odd considering they've been heels on television. But they had an angle midway through where all four guys got into the brawl. The ref went down momentarily while the Mod Squad worked over Tully. I think the official was actually Teddy Long, looking back now. And they had the deal where Luger tagged in to make the short comeback, but he got cut off. And they built to a sequence where Tully tagged in, ran wild for a minute. Bill Dundee tried to interfere again, but that really didn't go anywhere. And after Tully caught one of the Mod Squad members with a boot, he ended up dropping an elbow on him and scoring the pin while JJ held back Dundee on the floor. Again, just kind of a match. Really nothing too noteworthy about it. We'll talk about the latter half of the tournament matches because those were something. By far the most laughable thing on this entire tape was the Dave Meltzer interview. And yes, I'm not ribbing. We actually had Meltzer in Baltimore in 1987 doing a live promo talking about how much the wrestling business grosses in a given year. Good Lord. There's Dave throwing out his numbers, talking about how wrestling makes about $250 million gross income when you add up all the generated revenue from gates and other expenses. And then George Michael's follow-up question, he asks, how does it compare to other businesses? And Meltzer just stands there with the classic duh expression, and he literally had no answer. They actually had to restart the interview too, which was grand. Even in 1987, man, Meltzer just couldn't help himself but drop the words and about 1,100 times in the middle of a sentence. Nothing ever changes. God, and there's still people out there that subscribe to the Wrestling Observer, literally just to hear Meltzer stutter over himself and lose his train of thought, just like he did here. So that was oddly humorous. I did pop when Meltzer showed up, though. I'm like, oh God, this should be entertaining. Let's see how many times he can stop midway through a sentence and not finish a thought. It actually wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but he was also getting served a lot of softball questions anyway that really didn't require a lot of thought. Things like, who's the highest paid wrestler? Or how has wrestling evolved in the last 4 or 5 years? Just basic questions. I mean, Hogan was easily the highest paid wrestler by that period in 87, no doubt. I mean, he was probably making roughly in the ballpark of 2-3 mil easily. I mean, Roddy Piper was probably a close second. And I think those are the two names that Dave threw out there. But, I mean, it was a pleasant surprise. I was like, oh, look at that. Dave Meltzer when he had a full head of hair. And actually sounded like he had his head screwed on somewhat straight. Boy, how times change. At this point, there was a lot of infomercial stuff that I kind of skipped over. Not that it probably wasn't interesting, but there was a good 8 to 10 minutes of nothing. A little bit of historical retrospective on talking about Hogan's contributions to the business. Vince McMahon was there for a sit-down, putting over the wrestling business, evidently turning the whole thing into a Hogan slobber fest. But that's pretty much all I got out of it. It is hilarious how I'm watching the National Wrestling Alliance sponsor the 1987 Senior Memorial Crockett Cup, and meanwhile, smack dab in the middle of the tape, they're spending like 10 minutes putting over the WWF and how much bigger and better they were. Boy, if that wasn't a bad omen for what was to come down the pike, I don't know what is. Good God. But getting back to the actual footage here, we had the Armstrongs versus Luger and Tully. A little bit of a different vibe in the room compared to the Luger-Tully match with the Mod Squad. I mean that facetiously. We had a clear-cut face and heel team here. And this match was so great, man. It was so great. Bullet Bob and Brad in there just having their way with Tully. They're wrenching and working over his arm, constantly tagging in and out together. Like every so often, you'd see Tully try to reach out and extend the hand or tag in Luger, and he's visibly fighting and struggling to break free to get to his corner, but the baby faces would keep neutralizing him. Crowd's going batshit crazy whenever the faces would regain control. Tully's squirming and desperately fighting to get Luger to save him from getting destroyed. And the best part of this match, Bullet Bob's working over Tully, and right as Tully starts to drag Bob over to the corner, he lets go of the hold. He cold cocks Luger in the face while the ref was distracted, and while Luger gets in the ring to try and go after Bullet Bob, the babyfaces do the old switcheroo gimmick where Brad takes over. Ref, of course, doesn't see it. And when Hebner goes to turn around, there's Bullet Bob standing on the apron while Brad is working over Tully. Bullet Bob just stands there and shrugs. Nothing out of the ordinary there, sir. We tagged. Clean as a sheet. And like, you have to understand, like, I'm not doing this justice because I'm talking about it here. The genius of actually watching this transpire, like I said at the beginning, there is no commentary. Nobody is explaining any of this. Nobody is going over the psychology of what's happening in the ring. This is just purely going by the story being told in the ring from the boys. It's all facials. It's all mannerisms. And this is why professional wrestling used to actually mean a fucking thing back in the day. Back when the sport actually drew money and meant something. The whole story is babyfaces outsmarting the heels and making them look like chumps. And the people loved it. They got 10 or 12 minutes out of that. Just that one little basic premise. They didn't need anything else. No smoke and mirrors. They got over the story that needed to be told. Oh God, fucking Bullet Bob, dude. This guy had me rolling watching this match. They do another switch spot behind Hebner's back. Luger's flipping his lid on the apron and trying to get back in the ring immediately. And while all this is going down, there's Bullet Bob, casually hanging out in the ring, cranking on Tully's arm. Big old grin on his face. I'm howling with laughter by this point. Just the visual of Bullet Bob in there smiling and acting all smug toward Luger, all the while I'm saying to myself, it's a damn shame that I know this is all evidently leading to the heels cheating to win. That was before I even knew what the finish was going to be. I've watched this sport for many years, so I usually know how this stuff pans out. Unless it's a Road Warriors match where they just smash over dudes for 20 minutes straight and they still win. So after Tully's been killing in there for like 10 minutes, finally Tully manages to make the big tag to Luger. And with him being the fresh man now, he starts to overpower Brad and get the upper hand on him. He was all flexy-pexy, I should say, working over Brad there. But he had the tables turned on him pretty soon. It was right back to the Armstrong domination. You know, something else I loved about these crowd camera shots back in the day is getting to see that long shot of the guys going up top and doing those crossbody dives or the top rope drop kicks. The one Brad gave to Tully here was beautiful. So seamless, but it looked so cool from the wide shot. And we had the heat spot where JJ pulled down the top rope during a running spot. So Brad went flying out to the floor. The heels could work him over for the heat. You know, Brad does a great job selling while Tully and Luger are working him over. Finally, they do the double bonk spot where Brad gives Tully the atomic drop. Tully runs headfirst, colliding with Luger. Brad gets the big hot tag to Bullet Bob. He comes into Rex's shop, you know, going in and giving the heels those rifle chops to the chest. And those actually looked good. Not the pussy-ass weak ones that Eddie Kingston used to do on Dynamite. Finally, things broke down. Bullet Bob ends up beating a double clothesline from Tully and JJ behind the ref's back. And just like that, 1, 2, 3, the Horsemen steal the pinfall. And the crowd fucking showers the building with boos. Man. By far, one of the best matches out of anything in the entire tournament. Just simplified pro wrestling at its core. Didn't need all the gymnastic flips and all the tumbling routines and all the dives where guys are breaking their necks and breaking their legs and ending their careers before they're 30. And we wonder why turnover in the business is so frequent anymore. And man, I beat a dead horse when I always talk about this, but it's amazing to me. We live in the internet age. This stuff is right at everybody's fingertips. All the young cats need to do is just go on YouTube, search up some of this old territorial footage, watch what these guys used to do, learn how to actually work. It's not that fucking hard. It's never been easier to watch wrestling. Get all this old footage out there for people to just glance at for free. Most of you don't even need to pay a premium price to see. YouTube, Rumble, whatever you can get your hands on. But these stupid young kids are so focused on trying to pop the crowd anymore. So following that, we had the Road Warriors Midnight Express match. And while it was damn good, man, nothing will ever beat that original 86 Crockett Cup match. They tried to replicate it in some spots here. Just wasn't the same. There was also a lot of heavy editing that occurred here. Like major parts of the match it got skipped out on. Like all the parts where the heels were stalling on the floor, that all got drastically cut out. Still, what we saw of it was good. Maybe I was seeing things, but I think Stan hurt his knee in this match at one point. Because he was visibly limping and grabbing at his knee a couple times here. There was a spot they showed where Animal gave him a military press and then dropped him overhead. Instead of Stan coming down flat on his stomach, it looked like he tried to pad the landing by landing on his knee. And he came right down on it. So that's probably what aggravated it. But I saw that a few times here. I'm like, Stan's walking around a little bit funky. Bobby Eaton also got jacked around during this thing too. Hawk potatoed him a couple times during this match, pretty noticeably. There was a spot where he just cold cocked Bobby straight in the face with a chop, like right on the bridge of the nose too. And Bobby immediately grabs at his face. That looked very unpleasant. A couple little hiccups in terms of miscommunication on spots, but by and large, it's your standard Road Warriors match. They barely sell, although the Midnights did get in a rather lengthy heat session on Hawk toward the end there. But, they pick up and throw dudes around for a while. They fire back and, well, in this case, they didn't win, but normally is the case. The Road Warriors win in very convincing fashion. But there was a different story that panned out here. I like the angle right before the comeback where Corny threw the racket into Beautiful Bobby, and Bobby's standing there teasing he's going to use the gimmick. But when Pee Wee Anderson turns around, Eaton just tosses it out casually, not even drawing attention to it. Very well played. They actually did that a few seconds later with Stan too, and the crowd went equally ballistic for it. They're all screaming and panicking, and as soon as he tosses the racket away, they're all calm again. And again, talking about how the Road Warriors actually sold a little bit here, it's probably the most we've ever seen them sell, period. So it added a lot of extra drama to the match. But I even remember saying on the Friday podcast, the whole debate over which version of the Midnights was the better version. I love Stan and Bobby, and you can really debate from an in-ring technical standpoint. Maybe Stan and Bobby's matches were better visually. But man, Dennis and Bobby had such great chemistry together. And their matches always resonate a lot better with me because, I talked about it before. I was a big Mid-South fan. But I don't know. There really isn't a right or wrong answer. It's all personal preference, I guess. But this was a fantastic match. When the video first cut out, I thought they shaved off the remainder of the match. I was like, well, what the fuck is this? You can't just cut the video feed in the middle of a comeback. There's all this pandemonium happening, and right when we're about to get to the good stuff, the video just stops. It's like watching a Raw match before they cut the commercial. Turns out all I had to do was click the next video to see the remainder of it. It's so great. Animal gets the hot tag. He's thrown around the Midnights for a minute. Catches Eaton with a drop kick off the ropes, and he goes stumbling into Pee Wee Anderson. Poor Pee Wee taking a horrible bump through the middle rope. Basically had to throw his whole body out of the ring. And the finish to this thing. There was a lot going on. There's all this shit happening at ringside with both teams. Animal's in there about to get the visual pin on Bobby when Cornette tries to run in. And with the grainy footage, at first I couldn't tell what he was doing. He comes into the ring with his hands cupped together. So instinctually I thought, oh, so he's probably going to powder Animal or something. And then all of a sudden, all you see is this orange ball of fire shoot right out from Corny's hand. And I'm like, oh, he's a wizard now. He's channeling his inner Chris Jericho. He can shoot fire out of his fingertips. So, obviously you knew what they were going for here. But here's the weird thing. Animal didn't sell it. He took a bump, but he didn't, cover up his face to sell the fireball shot. And I actually had to rewind it to figure out what was going on here. I think the idea was that Paul Ellering was supposed to tackle Cornette before he could throw the fireball at Animal. Except, well, in actuality, it looked like the fireball made contact with Animal's face. So he goes down, and while Ellering is throwing Cornette out of the ring, I'm thinking Eaton's just going to roll over and cover Animal for the 3 count. And instead, Animal just no-sells the fireball shot entirely. He grabs the tennis racket that Corny left in the ring, and they basically do a DQ fucked finish where Animal whacks Bobby in the face with a racket, but Pee Wee Anderson catches Animal in the act, so he calls for the bell. And while the Road Warriors are beating ass and throwing the Midnights out like lawn darts, somehow they manage to escape. And, the Legion of Doom wasn't happy about it. It was, like I said, there was a lot of stuff happening to keep track of. Seeing everything take place in that wide shot, though, it had the feel of a real chaotic street fight going on. The action was good, too. The people were into everything. Like I said at the top, better than the Midnight Express Road Warriors match from the Crockett Cup last year? Probably not. But it was still damn good. It's just unfortunate that nothing else in the tournament came close to following either of those 2 matches we just talked about. The LOD Midnight match and the Tully Luger versus Armstrong's match. Those should have been the semifinals. The Raging Bull ravishing Rick Rude versus Superpowers match was fine for what they aired of it. Right after both teams made their entrances, the videotape actually cut out. And it picked up again about midway through the heat portion where the heels were working over Dusty. So I don't know how much of this they cut out, but looked like a good chunk of it was missing. But man, even in low resolution, you could still see all of Rick Rude's abs. Even with his back turned toward the camera for most of the match, just the mere sight of his back I'm watching him the whole time. I'm like, fuck, that guy's in great shape. Like, his back and shoulders alone look better than my entire body put together. Not that I'm Giga Chad or anything like that when it comes to having a natural physique, but I mean, I work out pretty considerably. 4 days a week, full body workouts. I can never have a body like Rick Rude did. So, with this match, obviously, we're still running with the story of Nikita selling the neck. So he stood on the apron the whole time while Dusty basically worked the 2-on-1 handicap match. Shockingly, he still found a way to win. He beat Bull with a reversal of a crossbody attempt from the top rope, which I laughed at. I'm just like, of course. Dusty made his own comeback and pinned one half of the World Tag Team Champions. That sounds exactly like something Dusty would have booked for himself. But, there wasn't much more to say about that one. The next semifinal round, I also kind of fast-forwarded through. It was Tully and Luger against Giant Baba, and I think it was Iso Takagi, his partner. Isao. I'm probably butchering that name horribly. I've talked about it before. My wrestling knowledge of the Japanese market around this time is kind of limited. I know Baba was in last year's Crockett Cup, and that was sort of an international thing they did at the time to try and incorporate some of the top names from around the world. This one I more or less didn't really find much interest in, so I kind of skipped over it. I did watch the Superpowers Midnight Express semifinal round. This time we actually got to see Nikita work with the brace on. And even with the kayfabe bad neck, Nikita's in there throwing, eating, and laying around like they're children. Again, just more of an opportunity for the heels to sell and make the babyfaces look good. Dusty did the old babyface spot where he gets eaten caught between the second and top rope, and while he's having Teddy pull the ropes up for leverage to try and get Eaton back on his feet, Dusty would keep hitting him with the bionic elbow, and Eaton would keep falling backwards in the ropes. I mean, that's another old school comedy spot, but you don't see enough of it in today's business, unfortunately. Again, large editing cuts in this one. One too long after the footage kicked back up. They had corny run to distraction spots so the heels could cut Nikita off of the heat. And that played well into the story of Nikita having the bad neck. So the Midnights worked over that injury. Crowd was really behind Nikita toward the end there. And again, showing the different ways these guys knew how to work tag matches back in the day. This was totally unique with the finish they went with. They didn't have Dusty make the hot tag and make the big save, score the triumphant win for the Superpowers. Now they actually kind of did a role reversal here. Dusty stood on the apron. Nikita made his own comeback. They did the miscommunication spot where the heels accidentally hit one another. And then Nikita hit the ropes. He creamed Beautiful Bobby with the Russian sickle and got the 3 count. Crowd went ballistic for it. Dusty let Nikita do all the work. Fantastic. A case where the babyfaces just outsmarted the heels and won clean. Nothing overly convoluted. Didn't need 40,000 run-ins to get it over. And all of it perfectly set up the finals with Tully and Luger versus the Superpowers, which, actually, you know what? I'm going to shake things up a minute. The Ric Flair-Barry Windham title match actually came before the Crockett Cup finals, but I want to save that conversation for last. I actually forgot that didn't end up main eventing the Baltimore show. They actually semi-mained that. But let me cover the Crockett Cup finals before I get to that title match. I think it's already kind of well known who won the 1987 Crockett Cup. That's not really groundbreaking news in the archives of history. It is one that I think kind of falls onto the back burner when people talk about the more memorable Crockett Cup winners. Like, you obviously remember the Road Warriors as the inaugural winners in 86. You remember Sting and Luger from 88. Dusty and Nikita is the one that I think kind of falls into the backdrop. Takes people a minute to remember that Oh, yeah, those guys did win the 87 Crockett Cup. And, for most people that weren't keen on the business around this point, they probably forgot who they even beat in the finals to win the tournament. Like, if you threw out Tully and Luger there, most people probably wouldn't catch on to it. But, trying to remember it off the top of your head is probably a challenge if you don't have fond memories of this period in Crockett Promotions. But this worked out so well for the finals. Like, you had history in there with Tully and Dusty. Luger's the new kid on the block, so this was a good spot for him to be in, giving him a chance to go up there and get close and personal with working with Dusty and see how he calls spots and lays out matches, getting the opportunity to be in the ring with him at the time. Like, you had the power game story with Nikita and Luger here. That was great. There were so many small details that I loved about the decision to have this be the final round in the 87 Crockett Cup. And hypothetically, yeah, they could have done the Midnights versus Nikita and Dusty. Would it have worked? Yeah, probably. But, this was more so giving Luger that big payout. And, speaking of the Midnights, it's a lot like what we talked about earlier. The heels' goal was to go out there and make Dusty and Nikita look great. Tully's out there bumping around like a pinball. Luger's feeding for both guys. By far the biggest pop of the match was when Nikita hit JJ with the sickle on the apron. And again, it's so awesome getting that far out visual of it, because you see Nikita deck JJ with a clothesline. JJ goes down in a spasm and starts convulsing on the ring apron while the referee's trying to shove him out to the floor. Just typical heel manager stuff. We get that really nasty double clothesline spot where Nikita goes over the top rope with Tully, and Nikita clips his back right on the edge of the ring apron, too. Immediately I'm thinking, oh, God, that guy's going to have scoliosis for the rest of his life. But, while both guys are out there on the floor, JJ ran another distraction spot so the heels could isolate Nikita. And again, this is what I love about the no commentary fan footage video angle. The sounds of the people screaming in the building, chanting for Nikita. It's just, it's almost otherworldly. The fact that crowds used to be this amped up, this passionate, this lively. You don't see crowds like this anymore, man. You really don't. Yeah, they pop for the big oh shit spots, but by and large, you do not get crowds that literally sit there and scream for the entirety of a 15 to 20 minute match. Pretty unbrokenly. You take out the commentary on Raw and just listen to the crowd reactions during heat sessions of matches. You could probably hear mice pissing in the arena. It's so damn quiet most of the time. But just listening to the fans screaming and cheering pretty much nonstop, especially at the end when Dusty gets that hot tag. God almighty, it's like listening to a football arena at the Super Bowl. The finish is so fantastic. Dusty's on the floor with Luger. Hebner's out there trying to get them back to their respective corners. Meanwhile, JJ throws in the shoe for Tully to use on Nikita, but Tully ends up accidentally clocking JJ first. Then he immediately turns around and whiffs Nikita with it, which the crowd was pissed at momentarily. But technically at this point, Dusty is still the legal guy. So when Tully goes to pile drive Nikita, here comes Dusty out of the woodwork. Top rope crossbody attack. 1, 2, 3. Crowd jumps to their feet. And we get the big babyface celebration post-match. Here comes the Crockett family to congratulate the Superpowers. They present them with the trophy and the $1 million, the whole gamut. It's a great visual. Seeing Dusty and Nikita hold up the trophy together. That's a classic shot. The only thing that sucked about this, they didn't show the footage of Magnum TA coming out at the end. Now remember, that was part of the original airing when Magnum made the on-screen camera appearance at the end of the show to come down and endorse the Superpowers together. We didn't get that footage shown here. And I was waiting for it. I was so disappointed. Because by this point, I don't think we end up seeing Magnum on camera again for like another year. We had that interview sit down with Tony on the February show a couple months back. Like, that was the first time we saw Magnum since the car accident. And, we did have the pre-tape interview with him earlier on here, but yeah, we didn't see him come out at the end. And that sucks, because I really wanted to hear that pop when he came through the crowd. It is what it is. But looking past that, great finish to the program. But like I said, I did want to take a second here to recognize the Flair-Wyndham World Heavyweight title match before we wrap up. Been building this one up on TV reviews, talking about how this was one of my favorite Flair-Wyndham title matches in their storied history together. I mean, they wrestled so many times over the years, and while they definitely had some classics in the early 90s, for whatever reason, this one always stands out to me. Out of every match I've ever seen between these guys, for whatever reason, I always go back to this one and cite it as one of my favorite of their collections of matches. I guess I compare it on some level to the match that Sting and Flair had at the following year's first Clash of the Champions show. Barry had obviously been in wrestling for a while by that point, but his career really didn't start to take off until they put him in those early top programs with Flair and the Horsemen on Crockett. Those matches he had with Flair throughout '87 were the matches that really put Wyndham on the map. He was a young guy that showed a lot of promise. Yes, he was already like 8 or so years into his career by this point. He had that really good title match with Flair in Florida. I think that was one Battle of the Belt show that Tony Khan so infamously tried to knock off in AEW. But, coming into Crockett on a bigger stage, getting a chance to really showcase his skill on a broader range in front of a nationwide television audience, this is where Barry's career was made. And I trace a lot of that back to the work he did with his early run in Crockett. For Rick, it was probably just another day at the office for him. But much how the Flair-Sting match from '88 was Flair's opportunity to make Sting, the same can be held true for the Flair-Wyndham program throughout '87. Flair made this guy a star. And all he had to do was go out there, let Barry show him up and get the better of him for large portions of the match, and prove that Barry was going to be a major player for years to come in the business. Hence the story development throughout his career when he'd wind up associating with the Horsemen about a year or so later. It all ties together. And, again, while we probably had better quality matches, I think the Florida match from '86 was the one that got the 5-star rating in the Observer Awards. And while that's all well and good, I haven't seen that match in a long time. I probably wouldn't argue against it being the more technically sound match compared to this one at the '87 Crockett Cup. But again, it's more so about the environment they were in. It's the spectacle of the venue, the timing of when this took place, the story implications for what followed. That stuff all plays a part in everything. And again, this is all textbook Flair, man. He is the genius definition of making a career out of getting the most out of having to do very little. Now, in comparison to, say, Flair versus Sting, or Flair versus Nikita, or even Flair versus Ronnie, this was less about Flair overselling and overbumping. This was more so about the psychology of just trying to play the game of one-upsmanship. Obviously, he had the chemistry with Wyndham. They had a story by now, or they had history by now. So it's not like this was the first time they were facing off. And, Wyndham was a good enough seller to where he could get sympathy, where Flair could work him over and the crowd would get behind Barry. Didn't need to be an 80-20 role where Flair did a lot of the bumping and eked out the win in the end. We've seen those Flair matches time and time again. They're great for what they are, but sometimes it's easy to forget that Flair was good at getting the heat. Even during this period when the fans are pretty pro-Horseman. And again, it was a long match, but they paced everything fluidly. They spent the right amount of time letting Wyndham get the shine before getting cut off. You had all the classic Flair tropes here. The begging off, the Flair flop, the flip bump over the turnbuckle where he takes the face first bump on the apron out to the concrete. All the usual cheating tactics you come to expect. Like I said, man, I love this match. One of my favorite Wyndham matches of all time. And again, taking into account the heavy editing bits here, I'm not sure how much they cut out from the original tape. The original match, I think, went somewhere within the ballpark of like a half hour. They probably shaved off about 5 minutes altogether looking back. As expected, they gave us the old fake out finish where Barry gets the visual 3 count while Flair's foot was on the bottom rope, and Tommy Young doesn't initially see it, so he waves off the call, and Barry thinks he has the match won. They go for another minute. Lots of great back and forth near falls at the end there. And in typical Nature Boy fashion, gets the win by pulling the trunks after the roll through. Again, was it the best Flair-Wyndham match in their series? Maybe not. They've had collectively about 150 matches throughout their career. Doing the math, I'd probably say like 10 to 15 of those matches were probably better than this one. But it's definitely up there. And again, timing and place. That means something of value. People get so caught up in the match quality a lot of the time. It's easy enough to overlook some of the other contributing factors. The environment. The fan reception. That stuff matters too. So I really have fond memories of this match. As I do for the whole show. I've seen the footage on and off over the years. And one of my brothers was actually in Baltimore at school during this period, so he was actually one of the fans in attendance for this thing. Talked about how big of a wrestling fan he was growing up. He told me some of the great stories about this little 2-day spectacle. I remember him telling me he had shitty seats. He couldn't even see half the stuff that was happening in the ring. But, I still wasn't born for like another 7 or 8 months. If only I got the chance to see this thing live. If only. So that was the 1987 Crockett Cup. The redacted version. And while we did not talk about everything, I think we covered the key highlights. And I'm glad I took the time to check out some of this stuff before the Friday show because it's going to tie things a lot better when we talk about the next TV episode. And now at this point, they're shaping up things for the Great American Bash Tour. Y'all remember how much fun we had covering that summer period last year. We'll see how things hold up in 87. The show's been pretty good so far. The TV shows, that is. Definitely not on the same level as the hot period we were covering in 86, but yeah, we're still in a boom period right now for Crockett Promotions. Things didn't really shit the bed in terms of the on-screen product for another couple of years. But that's also where the entertainment value is going to start to come into play. Because we all know how fun it is to talk about the bad periods in wrestling. See the entirety of the Nitro era from like 98 to 2001. In any case, this will be another heavy editing program this week, which is not a problem. Thanks all for stopping in to check this one out. We will be back for the Friday show. Got another epic installment of AEW programming to look forward to. And we'll have the continuation of our retro review series with World Class and Crockett TV. Thanks for stopping in. Have a good one, all. Peace out.